Welcome to the Support Raising Solutions podcast, where we help new and current ministry workers grow in being spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and fully funded Great Commission workers. Welcome to the SRS podcast. I'm your host today, Callie Davis, and I am the resource designer with Support Raising Solutions. And today our guests are Mark and Kathy Wilson, who are also a part of Support Raising Solutions. So you get the core team on the show today. Kathy is our coaching specialist, and Mark is our illustrious leader. He's the director of SRS. And they come not just with the wealth of information from their experience working at SRS, but also 27 years in ministry on the field, which is just a lot of history experience from their own, as well as interacting with other people. And today we want to talk about being budget driven. And kind of what that is the concept of always asking first how cheap you can do something instead of first asking what is the best solution. And that's approaching every decision. It's how you're framing your whole perspective. And we really want to walk through how being budget driven in your entire mentality around ministry, it doesn't just impact you. It also impacts the people that you're ministering to and your team and your family. So that is what Mark and Kathy are going to unpack for us a little bit today. Welcome. I'm so glad you could be on the show.
Thanks, Callie.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Well, great. How about you guys kick us off and kind of where is this topic coming from in your heart and your experience?
Well, I think for me, I don't think there's any other thing in my fundraising that reveals what my actual theology is more than the way I think about budgeting. And so what I mean by that is the way I budget and think about resources and funding reveals what I believe to be true about how God provides and what he means. And I think that carries not only over from resources, but it also carries over to how we think he will actually work in the hearts of people. And so we have a couple stories we'll share that we just experienced, and they revealed things about us and our teammates and just what we thought. And so I think hopefully these things will be helpful and just get you in a spot of examining what is it you say you believe versus what is it that you actually live when you're planning these things out.
Well, I agree that money is such a core concept. You see the Bible talking so much about what we do with our money, what we think about money, and I think it's because it's one of those outpourings of what's on our heart.
Yeah, it certainly does reveal. Yeah, it does. It does outpour, and it is a very clear indicator of what we believe. Kathy's got a really fun story. Well, I don't know if fun is the right word, but it is a bit entertaining about one of our friends and the way that he got around planning for an event on a very budget-driven perspective. Kathy, would you talk about that perspective that we got to experience?
Sure. When we were living in Germany, ministering to the American military dependents, we had a mentor, and he was we didn't realize it at the time, but he was very budget driven. And in our minds, we thought, he's got all these brilliant ideas and he's so savvy. And looking back, his students ended up not getting what they needed because he was so focused on the budget. Mm-hmm. So he had enlisted students, and so he thought, okay, they don't have money to go on this retreat, so how can I keep the retreat cost below X amount of dollars?
Okay, so it came from a place of kind of seeing the students' needs and abilities. That seems
Absolutely.
Like a really good heart space.
Absolutely. It was an excellent heart space. And if it had stayed with that heart space and then looked at being vision driven, okay, these students can't necessarily afford to come on the trip. What are some ways that we can fundraise? Or what are some ways that we can involve the community? Or we have, it's not just an enlisted community, we have officers. What are ways that those who actually have some money can help scholarship some students?
Oh, yeah.
those thoughts never entered his mind.
Oh boy. I feel like this is going to go downhill real fast.
So his thought was, okay, so rather than having an honorarium for a speaker for camp, I will speak myself. Rather than hiring someone to lead worship for camp, I will go ahead and do that myself. Rather than, I mean, you've lived in Germany, Callie. The buses, the big German buses that you pay for, they can be pretty expensive when you're...
They're like a coach bus. They are big, legit buses.
They absolutely. And so rather than doing that, he thought, well, I will get my bus license from the military and get one of their buses, and I'll be the bus driver.
When was he planning to sleep?
I don't think he was planning to sleep. And actually, if you knew him, he didn't sleep a lot. He didn't need a lot of sleep. But this was kind of his thought process. And then it was, oh, you know what? Rather than catering meals, I will have my wife be the cook for camp. And so between the two of them, for camp, they ended up doing everything.
Oh boy.
Now, they were able to keep the cost down. Students were able to come. So if you're looking at that goal, then it would appear on some level that the camp was successful. Mm-hmm. When you talk to the students, though, they didn't get any time with our friend. He was so busy being a cook and being a bus driver and being a worship leader. He didn't have any time for his students. And so he had some students that had some pretty significant God moments that he missed out on. And that was one of the things as they spoke with their students after camp, because he thought, oh, we had this great camp, we had all these people come, and they're talking to students, and he had a leadership student that said, you know what, I really could have used you. You had no time for me. So he had all these students come, but then he didn't have the actual time to actually invest in them during the camp.
So yeah, actually having an impact on these students, which I want to say was probably the main goal, not just having this event.
Absolutely.
Was completely lost.
Yes.
Oof.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh man. And that's exactly what we're wanting to talk about. If you start missing the big vision of what is the impact you're hoping to have, and then looking at the next step, what's that in an ideal picture? So to have impact, it would be discipleship time, it'd be conversational time to invest in those students. Okay, what would it take to make that happen? And yeah, at some point you might have some budget concerns, but you're also going to look at, are we sacrificing that ultimate vision of impact, in which case we might need an entirely different solution. If we're not going to get that, why are we doing this?
Yes.
Instead of making only budget decisions and chipping away at what that real goal was. Oof.
And you said it, and I just want to go back to it. When you sacrifice the ultimate vision for the cost of the event, that's the question we need to ask. Are we sacrificing the end product so that it can be a little cheaper? And I think that it comes through really clearly, but we don't want kids to miss out on the presence of the person who helps them understand and know Jesus just because we saved a few dollars on food or on a bus driver's license or anyway. But yeah, that was a great quote you had there.
I have a few occasionally.
That was excellent.
Wow. So, I mean, I see so many applications for ministry everywhere, because it's true. Probably the first thing that gets sacrificed is the potential for relationships when we start thinking more budget driven, because we're sacrificing time, availability, capacity, because trying to cover cost takes much more time and energy and capacity from us. So I think the first thing to go will be relationships. And that's where I think every ministry is wanting to pour in their best time and their best effort. Now, you mentioned budget driven doesn't just affect the work, it affects your team and your family. Can you dive into one of those?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I experienced in our years of ministry was I was around a team of executives that they would go away on their annual planning event, and they would come back and they would celebrate how much they cut out of the budget.
Okay, now wait, that seems like a good thing.
It does, but if you're cutting the budget every single year, and that is the mark of good budgeting, it wasn't necessarily that they achieved the vision or that they cut extra fluff out of the budget. It was that they cut and reduced the amount that this particular was the headquarters group was operating on. And, and again, I think you don't hear us say this. We are for good budgeting. We're not for wasteful spending, excessive spending, but you want vision-driven spending that directly impacts you getting to the goal. Now, if you were to talk to the staff, you would hear things like, yeah, we really can't pay enough to hire a really qualified person for this position. So the kinds of candidates we're getting for these roles are really underqualified and not really the top shelf quality. So we had a shortage of certain skill positions. You would hear, boy, we really have 20-year-old accounting software. And in fact, the company hasn't supported the software for 10 or 15 years, and we're still using it because we can't afford to upgrade it. Or you're going to have to wait 2 or 3 years because we don't have enough staff in this department to build the kind of recruiting materials you need for your department. But you see how everything is getting pushed down the road for the sake of having a smaller budget, so that they weren't being a burden to the rest of the mission. And so, but it really impacted what people could do with their job. And there was a morale loss. And it wasn't, people started to wonder, like, can we really succeed? I don't know that God will really come through. No, they didn't say that, but you could sort of feel like, well, things are just so hard. It's difficult. But I felt like what I heard from them is they had lost sight of God's ability to provide, and it ended up becoming a mark of good leadership, but they weren't really getting to their vision, or their people couldn't get to their vision because they didn't have what they needed.
Well, and it sounds like kind of backwards budgeting in my mind, as if they took all their ideas. What is normal is what I'm used to is you take your ideas of here's what we want to be able to have for projects and plans and growth and development. Okay, let's see, can we fit it all in the budget? Do we need to try to grow the budget if possible? And instead of doing that plan first, then budget, it's just because we want a smaller budget, great. Well, what doesn't fit, and wow.
Yep, and there was almost a there's extremes on both ends. So there's the excessive, like over budgeting, Learjet kind of thinking, right? And then there's sort of this simple, I'm trying to think of the right word, but kind of a poverty is more righteous, and because we do with less and we're not as worldly. So that's exactly, you're right. It wasn't backwards from a wrong thought process. And it really did undermine the ability to get things done, and projects sat and did get finished and got pushed down the road, and there was retention problems because people just didn't feel like they had what they needed. And then again, you're right, you couldn't attract the quality candidates because you couldn't pay well. So it really had all of these impact, but your team feeds off the way you think about money, and it really is, they see the way you view God in the way that you view money. And it's not just one area. There's a lot of areas, but it really is important for us to think, will God provide for us to do what we need to do? So leaders out there, hear me say, like, the way you budget and the way you cut or focus funds helps your team think about God in very clear ways and about his provision, his promise.
Oh, yeah. That's huge. I'm just thinking about if you constantly hit the wall of here's this amazing idea, we can move forward and have this impact, but the answer is always going to be, we never have enough money. The door's always going to be shut.
Yep.
You're going to stop speaking up. You're going to stop saying, we could do this for the kingdom, and instead say, well, why bother?
Yeah, you pulled out a great point there. Yeah, like it kills creativity. I hadn't thought of that, but that's a really insightful observation.
Yeah.
Very good.
And there's times you definitely can't do everything, but you have to be able to say yes to enough things to have momentum, to have growth, to have progress. Oof.
Well, yeah, and just imagine, I mean, if you were in the military and, you sent your army out to fight with equipment that doesn't work, they can't do their jobs and they're literally, their lives are on the line. Shouldn't we value the gospel going out with that same kind of fervor? Like, you need the equipment that gets the job done so that it's not in the way.
Wow. Well, the final aspect I know I want to touch on is how this even impacts your family. And this is something I think I felt personally. My parents started raising support. They came on crew staff when I was 10. And, well, first of all, they announced it to my family that my dad was retiring from the military. They felt called to family life. They'd been volunteers for many, many years and were very excited to make this transition. And a part of it was being missionaries on support. And I have two older brothers, and they were, I think, right around middle school at this time. And I distinctly remember my middle brother kind of sitting down with the other siblings. He's like, well, guys, make a really good Christmas list this year because this is going to be it. Like, this is our last Christmas. And he was dead serious. His vision of missionaries and living on support from just some experiences we'd had with family friends had been like essentially a missionary barrel. Like, that was going to be our future. And we were supportive of our parents. It wasn't that we were telling them not to make this change, but it was just this is going to be what it means for us. And I am so thankful that is not what my parents did. They were always fully funded in their second career in ministry. And that experience actually rippled down to why I was willing to raise support, because my family was fully funded. And growing up in that environment, what I thought it meant to be on support was to be a normal kid. And I went to school. We occasionally went to the movies. My family went out to dinner every so often. And there was always Christmas presents.
Very good.
And I didn't feel any different because my parents were on support than my friends, than anything else. And so when I had the opportunity to step into ministry and they told me I had to raise support, it was this vision of, I knew I could thrive. Yes, it was not going to be easy. It was going to take work. It was going to take effort to raise support, to be fully funded. But once I got there, that was doable. That was something that was just, it was going to be a good space for me to be in. But that was because my parents had been fully funded and had passed down that perspective. So that's at least one happy story we're having today. But what have you guys seen? Because you guys have raised a family. I just kind of was the kid in a family on support.
Makes me happy to hear you say that, because a lot of people out there, I feel like, have this misconception Mark mentioned earlier about somehow you're more righteous or you're more holy if you're poor or whatever. When we told our family when we first started raising support that we were going to be missionaries, Mark's grandparents were like, oh, okay, missionaries. So Grandma put together this care package. We get this care package. We open it up. There's like used clothes that smell like mothballs, and they're like from the 70s. So bad. And then there's like this Ziploc bag that has used tea bags in it.
Yes.
Used tea bags.
Oh dear.
And she's, this note that she thinks is so sweet about, here's the life you've chosen or whatever, and just trying to help out. And I looked at Mark and I'm like, is she serious? What is this?
And the irony is they were millionaires at the point, like at that point. Like, so it wasn't like they didn't have money, but it just was shocking that their perspective on what it meant to be a missionary was that. And it was a little offensive at the moment. But,
I didn't know what to do with it. I thought, I'm not sure what to do with it. But the sad thing was that kind of poor talk kind of seeped into our family over the years without us even realizing it. I remember when Mark went to boot camp the first time, I wasn't able to go with him. And so he came back and he's excited and he's, had this huge paradigm shift in going from being budget driven to being vision driven. And we're talking about it at the dinner table. And we realized that our kids had been inundated with this poor talk. And so it was kind of like, oh, you know what, Mom? You don't have to worry. You don't need to send me on that youth group trip. I know it's a lot of money and we don't have the money, and really it's okay. Like, these were the kind of things that they would say to us. And so we're sitting at the dinner table after Mark went to boot camp, and he, his mind was kind of blown, and he's talking about David as the first giver, and I want to be the first giver. Like, how cool is this? And so we're diving into the scriptures from Learn and looking at, this is different. And it took a while to realize it wasn't just impacting us. Our kids were like, oh, no, I can't go to the movies with my friends, or I can't, you talk about having Christmas and going out to eat, and our kids, they were the ones that were trying to protect no, we don't have money for that. We can't do that, which I think for me is what hit me really hard. And I had to go before the Lord and repent and be like, oh my goodness, this is really wrong that our kids have been.
Well, I think we felt grieved when we heard it. And I thought, oh no, I have taught my children, again, my theology of the Lord was reflected in how they heard us talk about money. And I really was grieved that I had given them an improper image of God.
But I don't think that I had even heard them talk like that until I remember this conversation. Like, it was so much a part of who we were. It was normal.
You didn't have eyes to see it.
No.
Vocabulary for it, yeah.
I think that was what grieved me the most was, wow, this is so ingrained. It's so core to our family. And this isn't what we want to be core to our family.
Yep.
Were you guys able to change it?
Well, yeah, so we did for about 2 weeks. We read through some of the passages that we had learned at boot camp. And so that one that Kathy's referencing is the Chronicles 29 passage. Just where does everything we have come from? It all comes from God. And we were giving back what's His. And, just having a proper view of money and things and resources and, working through, is it okay? Like, Abby had lots of questions, like, should I even be able to spend anything on myself? And so but it caused lots of good discussions. And I think we still have remnants of there, like our youngest will be like, oh, like her friends will pay for her, which is really nice. And she's like, but I don't have any money. We're like, yes, you do have money. And so it still pops up here and there, and we just have to remind them, hey, this is okay. And then with our oldest in particular, we're like, yes, it's okay. The Lord told the Israelites, you get 9/10 to spend on you and on what you're taking care of your needs. And 1/10 goes, no, obviously the Lord has expanded that. But just even getting, because when it's off there, I think it skews, we feel guilty about everything we do. So I think I wouldn't say we're perfect, but I hope that the kids have noted the shift in the way we talk and in, I don't know, what do you think? What do you think they are right now, Kat?
I think especially with Moira, since she's our one that's still at home, she feels a spirit of generosity as far as her friends are always coming to our house. We're the ones that are hosting. We're the ones that are feeding. We're the ones, and I feel like that in and of itself is kind of a shift of,
Sure, yeah.
of course, you can have your friends over. We can order pizza. We can go to a movie. We can have Christmas, you know? So I feel like there has been that shift where she doesn't just recognize it, but she really enjoys being able to be generous with her friends.
But we hope. We'll see. That story's not done being written yet. I don't
Right.
think so. Yep.
But it wasn't that you kind of developed a perspective and were therefore forever stuck with it. You can change, you can take steps, you can grow. We can all get a little better at this.
Yeah, and it can happen unintentionally too. And we were we were legitimately in a hard financial spot. So it wasn't that what we were saying wasn't true, but just the hardship we were feeling with, but the way we were talking about the hardship didn't do honor to the God we serve. Yeah.
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 Wow. And I think what I hope our listeners are hearing from this is that I want to say often budget driven starts as a personal perspective, personal decisions of you want to make fiscally responsible decisions that, enable other things to happen because you're not spending money. But it isn't just about how it affects you. It will have this ripple effect to all the people you're interacting with, all the people you're hoping to impact, your team, your family. And that's something I don't think we consider enough of how our perspective will end up kind of just coloring everyone around us, whether we intend it to or not. And that's something that is true if you are young in ministry, if you have a family, if you're leading. And that is huge, because I don't think we often realize the impact that how we view things can have. As I first started ministry fresh out of college, I was working in Germany and working with people from a number of different organizations. They came with different standards and different policies, and quite a few of them were underfunded, which led into a lot of budget-driven decisions and which led into a lot of financial stress. And I saw them leave the mission field, honestly, like closed off to ever stepping back into ministry.
Yeah.
And it just made me wonder, what message are they sending to the friends when they talk about their experiences?
Yep.
To several of them have gotten married and have kids. And like, will those kids ever be interested in working in ministry because of the stories they'll hear from their parents? And there is this rippling effect that, we have a responsibility to seek after the Lord, to seek His perspective for what He wants to do in our lives and how He wants us to thrive. And that is not something we should take lightly.
Yeah.
And I think it's important too, as you're talking about families. And you know what? I just remembered something as you were talking about that we went back and did with our kids, is we actually went back and said, let's go back and talk about when God provided for our needs. And have you ever been without?
Yeah.
And have you gotten to do not just the things you wanted, wished to do and needed to do, but the things you wanted? And so we went back and they each thought of a few things where they saw God do something for us. And we talked about provision of housing and provision. Anyway, it just was a really good moment to kind of shift to say, this is what we feel, but this is what's true about God. And He has always taken care of us. And that is still absolutely true to this day. The stories of His provision are far more than the disappointments we might have had. And so I just want to encourage, like, if you guys have kids out there, spend some time talking about God's goodness to your family and how He has shown up in vision so that you could do what He's asked you to do. I think that's a good storyline to tell and help your kids repeat.
Well, and including them in that process was really good for me. Hearing them celebrate certain things I didn't remember, like God came through here, and I'm like, yeah, He did, and then somebody else, God did this. It built momentum in our family to kind of reaffirm, yeah, God is taking care of us.
Yep.
Wow. Well, Mark and Kathy, thank you guys so much for joining us today for the podcast, for the stories, the experiences, and just kind of recasting the vision of why being vision driven in our finances is so, so vital, not just for us to thrive and our families to thrive, but for that bigger vision of the Great Commission, for the lives that the Lord is wanting to change. We do not want to be the limiting factor there. So thank you guys for joining us. Thank you everyone for listening, and we hope that you continue to thrive in your ministry and workplace. Thanks for joining us today, and please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode as we work to give more insight into building and maintaining your ministry partnership team.